Very special thanks to Cars of Somerset for providing the vehicle in this review, of course, and if you want to check out this vehicle's spec or stats or price, if it's still available for sale, or commission them to find you another one, or perhaps even check out the rest of their stock, then click the description right below the video. There's a link in there wherein you can find all of that info over on their site. There aren't that many reviews here in Beards and Cars which I get hyped for myself. There are many which I look forward to doing, and there's a whole bunch of them which I'm yet to do that I really want to. This to me was what I would call one of my bucket list reviews. This has always been one of my favourite hot hatches. So the expectations for me were certainly higher than most cars which I go in to review. Unless it's something else which I already love, like a Maserati, or something legendary like a Ferrari F355, then generally speaking I enter with a fairly neutral attitude and just a completely open mind to be surprised, disappointed, whatever. When you have an expectation, the risk is greater. So I'm both going to touch on whether or not this car lived up to what I was hoping and expecting it would be like, and of course, just purely objectively, regardless of personal opinion, as a reviewer, is it a good car? What are the upsides and downsides? If you're perhaps considering buying one, what should you be looking out for? What does it offer? How does it compare to some of its rivals, and even what are some of the issues that they can have? So first of all, let's talk about my expectations versus the reality. I've loved this car since day one. It's one of the relatively few hot hatches that I've loved since I first saw it, and I've never changed. I've always loved this car, especially in the cliched lime green, and to me it's just such an over-the-top car that I'm surprised it ever got past the concept stage. And I'm so happy that it did, because just occasionally a manufacturer goes ahead and makes this crazy production car that you wouldn't really think they ever would. This wide arch kitted, huge rear wing, diffuser, popping and crackling, 300 horsepower, going through the front wheels, lime green Ford Focus. It just sounds nuts. It sounds something more like Pimp My Ride or Max Power would do, rather than Ford on an actual production line. To me, if the Golf R32 is, as I called it, the muscle car of hot hatches, then this is 100% the Lambo of hot hatches. It's green, it's loud, it's over the top, and it's unabashedly crazy. Sometimes to its own fault. Now, when I say to its own fault, I mean one specific way, and that is the concept of a really fast front-wheel drive car isn't unattainable. Honda does it all the time and they do it very well. Renault does a fantastic job of it as well, and Ford does with numerous different models, but primarily the Focus and Fiesta in their ST and RS forms. However, even with all of that being said, there's arguably only so much power you can put through a front-wheel drive chassis before it starts becoming a bit unwieldy. When it gets to the point where you have to almost plan 6 months ahead of time to get a controlled launch, well, to me that just goes to highlight why I prefer all-wheel drive cars more often than not, and even sometimes rear-wheel drive, because you can just get more of that power and torque down. This one, right out of the factory, has 300 horses and an even more nuts 325 pound-feet of torque, which is 440 newton meters. Now that's from a Volvo-based 2.5 litre straight 5 engine, pretty unique in the hot hatch scene, and it's essentially the same base engine that they used in this generation of ST as well. But of course, much bigger turbo, reworked in many ways, as is the rest of the car compared to an ST, and the result, as I said, is some pretty serious numbers. And then if you buy the RS500 edition, which is super rare, that's got even more, just under 350 horsepower, which is even more nuts and of course even quicker. Now, in terms of performance, this thing kind of reminds me of, weirdly enough, the Vauxhall Vectra VXR, not the Astra, which you might think of as a great rival, and it is, but the Vectra always struck me, even back when I was a kid, when that first came out, as being such an odd car, because it was this relatively unassuming base model sedan that Vauxhall then tuned up to be a 160 mile an hour super saloon, in effect. This Focus is kind of like that in the hot hatch world. This can do 163 miles an hour. Only a couple of decades ago, that would have been Porsche territory. Now it's a Ford Focus. The 0 to 60 suffers a little bit because of not having all-wheel drive, and arguably because it doesn't have something like a DSG option as a Golf R32, for example, would. So 0 to 60 is about 5.6 to 5.9 seconds, depending on who you ask. In the case of this one, it's even quicker, because this is tuned to 400 horsepower. It's got a remap, it's got a Miltec exhaust, H&R springs, spacers, a number of other things which you can read about on the website if you click it down below. But even the base car is a beast of a hot hatch. There are two things which, if they were changed on this car, would make it easily top 5 of the entire Beards and Cars series for me, and it's two things which aren't going to change. One is I wish this car had all-wheel drive, and funnily enough Ford did exactly that for the Mark III, and I'll be very curious to try that one out, even though on the surface of things I still prefer this one, to be honest. The second thing they have still never done, and that is give it a DSG. Give it the option of having like a conventional city traffic automatic with then kind of a Tiptronic, almost sequential feeling mode, as many autos do, and of course paddles as well. To me that would be best of both worlds. You put that together with all-wheel drive, even if you didn't touch the power and torque, it would take it from 5.9 seconds to 4.9 easily. I guarantee it. That to me would make this a literally perfect car. However, neither of those things happened. It's got an old school 6-speed manual, all that power and torque goes just through the front wheels. That sounds like a beast. Even Honda doesn't typically go for that kind of power through the front. Integras have about 190, Civic Type R's around 200. It's only more recently that we've started to see 300, 350, etc. horsepower going through just the front. This one was kind of ahead of the curve in that way, coming out in 2009, and the run lasted from 2009 to 2011. Now, in terms of buying one of these now, unfortunately, I mean, fortunately for owners, but unfortunately for buyers, they've gone absolutely nuts on used values. Currently, at least at the time of releasing this video, the cheapest one on AutoTrader is 18 grand, and that one has 150,000 miles on the clock, which is insane. Then the lower mileage versions, sometimes super low, like collector's condition, people are asking 45, 50 grand for them. And that's not even an RS500 necessarily, that's even these normal, untuned, low mileage versions. Now sure, it's a modern icon, but this isn't actually a homologation car. So to see those kind of values does surprise me. It's a fantastic car, without question. But even I would say, as a lover of the car, that's a bit excessive. You could literally buy either a Ford Focus RS of this generation, or a used Aston Martin Rapide. I know which one I'd choose. I love the Focus, but it's not really much of a choice for me. Now, when it comes to this car and what it can do, potentially as a daily rather than just a toy, well, first things first, the space is fantastic. The second gen Focus has a ton of space anyway, even though it doesn't have 5 doors. Tons of space in the back for the rear passengers, great space in the front, headroom was not an issue at all. I never felt cramped. It reminded me of the Golf in that sense, but it felt even bigger than the Golf. Put simply, I absolutely loved it. The space was fantastic, left nothing to be desired. In terms of performance, I will say that despite having massive power and torque, it can be a little bit daunting. I would describe it as to decide to try and fully open up that 300 horsepower, or in this case 400, especially at lower speeds. I mean, off the line, forget it. I'm not wasting a front set of tyres just for the sake of getting a quicker launch. Again, all-wheel drive would have solved that issue, but that's not what we've got to work with. When you're rolling though, it's fantastic. And I will say, and this is to any who know me, pretty much the biggest praise I can give to a vehicle like this, I actually really enjoyed using the manual in this car. I don't like manual gearboxes, and many of you know this. This is the first time I've genuinely loved using a manual in any car, including the Ferrari F355. So to me, that says quite a lot. There's something undeniably addicting about hitting a shift, hearing that dump valve. It does feel like a rally car. Sounds a little bit Subaru-esque as well. The straight 5 will do that for you. crazy rolling on, spooling up, almost like 80s or 90s style turbo lag, which even though technically makes it slower than it could be, it feels appropriate. To me, it's almost like a turbine, which of course is my favourite kind of engine, and that rolling, building performance and torque and power is so much fun. It's so addictive in a similar way to the Nissan GT-R, which I reviewed. Of course, that one's far more responsive and ultimately far quicker, but it's similar. It has that really addictive build of performance, which you just keep wanting to get a hit of. And amongst other things, because of the GT-R's all-wheel drive, because of this car's front-wheel drive, you can open it up without really worrying too much about the car suddenly losing control. Sure, you can crash it if you drive like an idiot, of course, but for all of its crazy power and torque, it did feel usable, and the performance was very, very fun. Handling-wise, it is big, it's fairly heavy, even with front-wheel drive for a hot hatch. I will say I liked it, but I am a little bit biased. I love big, heavy cars. In fact, I prefer them. Maybe it's because I'm a bigger guy myself, so I'm used to piloting around a larger, heavier body. Maybe it's something to do with that, I don't know, but I just love bigger cars. I like to have that feeling of weight. I like a vehicle that feels grounded through corners, that you can really throw around. Something that's meaty, and this car feels just that. It's meaty, it's beefy, it's not quite as precise or as sharp as a Golf R32 or even as the Audi S3 or perhaps the Civic Type R, even though I do prefer this over that car, but it's very reassuring. That's how I would describe a lot of this car's personality. It feels very safe and very forgiving, which is surprising given that it's this lime green monster, but it's a very pleasant car to work with. It feels like it wants to work with you, not against you. In terms of stuff like running costs, well, if you can afford 50 grand for one, then you probably aren't too concerned about that, but incidentally, it's not too bad. If you push it hard, you get about 20 to the gallon out of it. If you drive super frugally or on the highway / motorway here in the UK, you can get about 40 apparently, and it can even average 30. In reality, most owners will tell you that because of the way you drive it more often than not, you're looking more like an average of 20 to 25, which in conjunction with a 62 litre or 13.6 UK gallon tank, the range is about 270 to 350-ish miles. So not exactly a super eco hatchback, but for what it is, for its performance, for how many smiles per mile you get, it's good enough. What then in terms of issues? What should you be looking out for? Well, certain things that I always like to say, of course, apply. Look at how many owners it's had. Check out its MOT history even more so than its service history, because that will often tell you about failures which it's had, or certain things which may need to be changed because they haven't already. Sometimes not seeing something on an MOT can be just as bad as seeing it. In terms of actual issues, there are 4 which stood out to me from looking in owners' forums, so of course add to these below if you are or were an owner. Those include exploding plenums, which can be uprated and improved, the torque mounts for the engine, again, they can be retrofitted and improved with aftermarket parts, as a lot of stuff on this car can, leaking radiators, again, a fix which can be done, and the ABS leads can apparently stretch as well. Now there are a number of other smaller issues and some larger ones, ECU related stuff, which I saw repeated by different members of various Ford forums. So as I said, this is where the ownership experience of you guys really comes into play. If you're watching this, if you are an owner, absolutely slap the issues down below, maybe warnings that you'd have for people, things which you can preemptively do to prevent issues before they even occur, all that kind of good stuff. So if you are watching the video and you're looking at buying one, be sure to check out the comments below. Ultimately, this is a car which definitely lived up to my expectations. I absolutely loved driving it. It's easily one of my favourites of the year so far, and I'm so happy to be able to say that, because they say don't meet your heroes. This has always been a hot hatch hero of mine, one which I've really wanted to review, and I'm so glad that it lived up to it. I was shockingly pleasantly surprised by just how great the manual is to work with. For some people, I could see them saying, you know, if you're a hardcore manual purist, oh, maybe it's too forgiving, maybe it's too easy, but that's why I like it. You can legitimately pull away off the line with no throttle at all in this car, because it's got so much power and torque. You just let out that clutch and it pulls away on its own. I love that. It reminds me of an auto. It's got that ease of use. There's no juddering, there's no stalling. It just gets the job done. It requires very little finesse, and much like the rest of the car, it kind of feels like a tank, and I love that. It feels like this burly beast that can pretty much take whatever you want to throw at it, but at the same time be a spacious, comfortable, surprisingly forgiving daily driver if you want it to be, all with those joyous sounds when you change gear, which of course every petrol head loves. For me, fantastic experience with the car. I'm very keen to test out in particular the newer all-wheel drive one, and potentially even the older one as well, although getting my hands on one of those might be more difficult. Ultimately, really happy with it. Now all I really need to drive in the hot hatch category to complete my top 3 favourites, since I've already driven of course the Golf R32, is the Renault Megane R26. That is, well, at least at the moment, before driving one, my favourite hot hatch. It remains to be seen what it's like when I actually do, but it will have a lot to go up against to beat this in the Golf. But overall, that's it for my thoughts. Of course, if you're keen on checking out the other reviews which I talked about, you can click that eye at the top right of the screen and it will jump through to those reviews. Or alternately, if you click the picture on screen now, you can go to the Beards and Cars series and watch all the episodes, or whichever episodes interest you. But until next time, I'll see you then, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.